if we were going to accomplish, our larger term vision of company growth and setting ourselves up on this like really sustainable path so the company can outlive us, it wasn't going to happen the way that we were doing it.
Brian, thank you so much for joining us today. Really excited to talk about this. So the podcast has historically been implementers, and it's confessions of an implementer. But I think it's really interesting and unique when we can bring on business leaders that are operating on EOS, and we can talk about their journey and the different things and watch outs that you might have experienced along the way. But one, thank you so much for coming on. And two, I looked at, I was looking at your bio and I saw Rainforest Cafe. And about maybe 6 years ago, I read a book. I think it was by the founder of Rainforest Cafe, and he was outlining like what it took. And he said he turned his entire house into like a demo of the cafe, and that's the way that he actually raised the investment. Let's start there. How did you get into food, and we'll see where it takes us.
Yeah, that's Steve Schussler is the guy's name who came up with the concept, and famously, that was sort of a bit of company lore. I think it was like the lower level of his house, maybe it was his basement or something. He had converted into what he envisioned Rainforest Cafe to be. And if you've been to Rainforest, it's lots of lush greenery. There's statues. There's rain falling from the sky every once in a while. There's a thunderstorm sound effects. It's quite the production, and that time period, it was sort of the late 90s. Theme restaurants were really taking off. So he was at exactly the right time coming up with this really unique theme in the industry. And he created this concepts restaurant in his basement to pitch it to investors. And the investor that eventually ended up funding the first Rainforest Cafe at the Mall of America here in Minnesota was a guy named Lyle Berman. And Lyle Berman is interesting because his family business was leather retailing. They had a big chain of leather stores in malls, and they were purchased by a company that I worked for called Wilson's Leather. So that was my connection basically to the Lyle Berman universe. And so when Rainforest launched, they needed support in their retail area. They needed someone who understood retail systems, that sort of thing. And that's how I ended up being at Rainforest, because of my connections through Wilson's, which had bought, Lyle's company. And so, yeah, I was at I tell people I never actually worked at a startup, like a .com startup, but Rainforest really felt like a .com startup. It was run that way. It grew incredibly fast. There was a lot of things happening at Rainforest. It was quite the education for me. Seeing a company grow as quickly as they did. Sort of how I got to where I am now. I was on the team that helped develop the website for Rainforest. So this is probably 1998. So pretty early on, but companies, restaurants, things like that, we were all making websites, and they were changing so often. As part of my role being on the team of people internally who worked on that project, I really got bitten by the web bug. And it's not a thing that you could even imagine in 2024, but in 1999, the internet was pretty hot. And so it was really cool because no one really knew where it was going. People were buying dog food on a website, which seemed crazy at the time. So it was just a very exciting time to be in the web. And so I taught myself using these CD-ROMs that I still have, actually. So, I found them when we moved into our new office. I taught myself how to code websites. And I remember talking to my wife, this is what I really want to do. But if I do it, I'm going to take a pay cut. It's going to be like a downgrade because I have a pretty good job right now. And I want to do this sort of entry-level web development job. And she's like, cool, let's do it. And because it was early on, we didn't have kids yet. So that was the time to do stuff like that. And I found a job in the newspaper. That's how long ago this was. There was a job listing printed on dead trees, and it was for a web developer. And so I applied for this job at an agency, which, spoiler alert, is the agency I'm at right now. We eventually, myself and two other partners, bought it from the guy who founded it. And I was a front-end web developer. I designed websites. I then moved into project management, account management. For a while, I led our team of developers. And the guy who founded the agency, things were getting hard. The dot-com bubble had popped. It wasn't fun for him anymore. And he was like, I don't think I really want to own an agency any longer. And so he was trying to find someone to take it off his hands. Couldn't really find anyone in that environment who wanted to do that. So I said, you could sell it to us, because myself and my two partners at the time, we touched all of the business. And so that's what happened. Basically, we bought the agency just 20 years ago. Actually, this year it's been 20 years since we bought the agency. And yeah, and then we started to evolve, and it's not a straight line to what we are today, which is a food content marketing agency. We sort of marry strategy and creative to create connections between consumers and the brands they love wherever they enjoy food. But if I took you through the long, step by step of what it was 20 years ago to today, it would make some kind of sense. But yeah, that's kind of how I got here. And it was, yeah, it's just one of those things where you just have to keep following your bliss, and paying attention to what you're interested in, and eventually, I think you'll end up in a good spot, which is where I am right now.
And when you started in web development back in the mid to late 90s, like the World Wide Web was completely different. And I think people were starting to explore selling things online. It feels like there was a big marketing kind of angle to this instead of like commerce. Like, did you find yourself more in the early days, like using marketing principles and some of these other things as you're designing, or were you like, I am a developer and I want to learn how to code, and what did that look like?
Yeah, actually, there was a point when I think I wanted to be a developer. I wanted to build websites, and that was it was a whole new medium. It was probably what it was like at the beginning of radio or the beginning of television, is that nobody really understood what the, you know, borders of what the web was going to be at that time. And so for me, it was just a really exciting, creative place to play in. And famously, we talk about this internally. You'd go to a client meeting in the early 2000s, and you'd talk about something that you could do, and they'd say, hey, well, we could do this and that, and you'd go like, yeah, let's do that. And then you'd get in the car on the way back to the office and go like, how are we going to do that? I have no idea. But you would figure it out, right? And that was the fun of it. And then there was a point in time when it became more professionalized, or it became more commoditized, right? When they're actually teaching these things in school. And that's when it started to become less fun for me. I am a little more entrepreneurial. I am the company visionary. For me, I kind of always want to have the next creative challenge that's out there. And so for me, and for a lot of other folks in the company, it just became a little too much of a commoditized business. And that's what led us to evolve into what we are today. Um, so where I was coming from initially was probably more of a creative, just excited to be here kind of standpoint. We were marketing. Um, and a lot of the work we did back then was more marketing rather than commerce. Commerce came later, actually, after, when I got into it. Um, and as it became, sort of perversely, as it became more established and a little more regimented, that's when I sort of kind of lost interest, because I wanted to do, new and exciting things as opposed to things that everyone knew how to do. I don't know. I don't know if that makes any sense, but like, that's just like a personality trait. Yeah.
You're speaking like a true visionary, where it's like can't sit still, want to be kind of on the bleeding edge. And I think you said, as it starts to become commoditized, it's like, well, everybody's doing it. They're training people to do it. Like, there's other people that can solve those problems now. Let me go find the next mountain.
It's funny, as going through the process of EOS, I used to think of that trait that you're describing as almost like a personality flaw. Like, if I was more serious, I would be like focused on, getting things done, or whatever the case is. Um, but what I've realized is that that is a role that I play. Like, I keep the company evolving. I keep the company moving, and not getting too sort of static or comfortable. Like, that is my thing. Like, I'm always like, if things are going too well, if things are too comfortable, I start to get a little anxious. Like, what's wrong with this picture, right? Like, I feel like there's some little, like, boogeyman behind a tree or something that we need to be worrying about in those situations. But that's my job. That's literally what I do. And it's through executing EOS and implementing it in our company that I realized that I have a role to play, and that is my role. So I feel a lot more comfortable with myself because I don't feel like it's necessarily a personality flaw.
And when you, as you're going through this this acquisition, what was your role at that time? And like, were you good at that role? Because it sounds like you're always looking for problems to solve. And it's like if you're not sitting at the very top of the organization like you are today as the visionary, like you have kind of clear things that you're responsible for, metrics. Like, what role were you in before you got into this? And was it just like with all your partners, hey, I'm going to take the visionary seat?
So when we bought the company, I was in charge of our development staff. Like I was leading the developers, and I was responsible for one of our client relationships because we were a relatively small company. I think when we bought the company, we were 11 people, and when the partners left, the previous partners, we were 9 people when we bought the company. So everyone had to wear at least 2 hats. There just weren't enough heads to fit all the hats. And I was good at it only because I think at that time, as I said, it was all very new and things were moving very quickly. So I felt like there was always enough novelty and new challenges that were presenting themselves, and that I got to try to figure out. After we bought the company, we were young and we didn't really know what we were doing, and so for a while we kind of thought like, hey, we'll all sort of be in charge, and that very quickly became like a problem. Like if everyone's in charge, no one's in charge, right? And so I remember distinctly having the conversation with my partners like, okay, look, I love you guys and I love our company and everything else, but like, I really feel like I need to have a different role here. Like, we can't do things by consensus anymore. Not that I want to be a dictator, but I feel like someone needs to be leading. And right now, the way we're doing this, no one's leading. And so we did have that conversation, and it worked out great. I have great partners. We all have sort of different personalities, so it turned out well. And it might not have turned out well if my partners had been different people. If there had been 2 of me in there instead of just 1 of me, like maybe that would have been more of an issue, and we wouldn't be sitting here today. But there definitely was a point where I felt like to the need to lead. I didn't mean to write poetry there, but like I just felt like I like that is where I felt comfortable. I felt comfortable being sort of the front man, so to speak, and EOS has just helped me sort of move more into that role than I was before EOS.
What were some of like the leadership dynamics? Because like as you talk about leading a team of developers and maybe managing some of the larger accounts, and you're coming out of that, which is a departmental role or maybe even a core function of the company, and now you're stepping up into a position in which you're setting the vision and you're like you are leading. You said this earlier, and the difference between leading and managing, like you're setting the course and you're trying to get everybody aligned around that, or managing, just making sure everybody's doing what they're supposed to be doing. Like what were some of the obstacles that you faced as like you yourself professionally is transitioning into that type of role?
I really like what you're saying there, the difference between leading and managing, because I think that my natural instinct is probably not as a manager. I love building teams. I love it's one of the best parts of my job is sort of establishing a vision and then creating or cobbling together the team either from internal resources or if we have to go outside to fill certain seats. That's the part that I really enjoy, setting the thing up to succeed and then stepping back. So I don't really think of myself as a great manager. And so for me, again, sort of like getting to the point where I could realize that my superpower was not the things that I thought traditionally I should be judging myself on, like being able to keep my nose to the grindstone, um, just making sure that the everyday processes were getting done. These are the things that I've always struggled with. And so for me, that obstacle was sort of like acknowledging, learning that my role was not what I thought my role would have been had I asked myself when I bought the company, right? Like I thought that the things that I should be focusing on um, were different than the things that I'm actually, I think, better at. And so just sort of self-realization of it's not necessarily a personality flaw that I'm always looking for the next thing, because if I'm not doing it, there is nobody else in the organization who is doing it. And so the organization has to keep evolving. It has to keep adapting. And so that's actually a really important job. And I didn't really understand that when I was a lot younger than I am right now. So I feel like like personally, I had to just sort of come to that realization that that was the role that I should play, and that is the value that I bring to the organization, not necessarily in managing groups of people.
That's like what's interesting about this is it's kind of an unnatural position when employees take over a company and now everybody has to figure out what new seats. And so it sounds like when that happened, everybody is kind of in the same seat up above, and we're going to try and manage by consensus. It sounds like you had some partners that also believed that this was the right path. Um, and did they just see something? Did they see the same thing in you that you see in yourself at that point? And so this was just like we're all going to celebrate this, and there was nobody else that was like, well, wait a minute.
There was no one else. Like, again, there were three partners at the time. There's five partners now, but at the time, I think they were frustrated as I was, with how the company was developing, and so I don't know that they necessarily saw it in me, but they were very happy that I raised my hand and said I wanted to do it to give it to me, because they weren't sort of set up to play that role. Um, so I don't know that necessarily they saw it in me. They saw this visionary kind of role. But it was something that we all recognized was a problem with how we were running the company, and so they were very happy to see me raise my hand. And I like to think, since I've been doing it now for, you know, probably when we finally made the decision to sort of structure ourselves that way, it's been at least 18 years or something. They're still letting me do it, so I feel like they must have seen something, along the way.
Did you change any of the core values? Like, has this evolution over the last 20 years, have you guys evolved the culture of the company, or did you keep the same?
It's actually one of the things that when we first started talking about implementing EOS, we had done work. We'd come up with, mission, vision, values. We had done sort of that sort of exercise. And so I felt like the company had a pretty strong culture. And my concern walking into EOS was that EOS was going to replace that culture. I didn't really want, um, I didn't want to replace our culture, because I thought it was pretty good. What I didn't realize is that what EOS has done is actually allowed us to sort of strengthen and take our culture to another level, and it given us the tools to actually live our values and live our culture in a way that wasn't always easy before. So that was a big concern of mine, that we'd been in business for a long time, and we felt like we had a really strong culture. But what I think that all we've done is accentuated that.
And when you say that the core values and some of these exercises that you've done, like you had core values, and then when you started to kind of tie all this together through EOS, like was it the people analyzer that started to kind of help hold that accountability, or like what kind of brought it together that you're talking about?
Our implementer is Sue Hawks, who's I'm just unbelievably a huge fan of Sue's, and I feel like I can't say enough good things about Sue. I think Sue is no small part of why we've succeeded in our adoption of EOS. And so, yeah, going through the process of codifying our values with her again, which we'd already done some pre-work, but we didn't do them. We got crispier working with Sue, and then rolling out the people analyzer. And then that's the best part about it, of course, is now everyone understands. You've documented, and we've talked about them. We have quarterly all company meetings, and we talk about our values every single time. And with the people analyzer process, of course, everyone is talking about the values with their immediate team lead every quarter. So we've really, like, nothing is better at building your sort of values muscle than continuously talking about them and applying them to your everyday challenges that you have as a service agency, as any kind of company. Like, we're a service agency. Yeah, that process has really what's like it helped us in defining them even more so than we had done before, and then really getting everyone in the company. Now we're almost 60 people, getting everyone in the company to live them. And the best part, we recently have had sort of a challenge with one of our clients, and our team came to us and said, what about our values? And so it was just an opportunity for to see them really adopting them, really sort of believing them, and then challenging us to make sure that we're living up to our values. That was really satisfying to me. I mean, I really, that was one of the first times it like clicked in my head that everyone is on board with this. And that was just a really powerful and pretty cool moment for me.
That's incredible, and I think that's going to be worth kind of deep diving on just a hair, which is this notion of we always get wrapped up in core values and how they apply to our own company. And sometimes we think about it through the lens of our vendors. I think very rarely people get blinded by revenue and sales and things like that. And so we're willing with our clients to sidestep some of that. Before we get to that, there are a lot of instances, and this happened at Hunt a Killer. So we self-implemented back in 2017. We had an implementer come through my Vistage group. It was one of those, oh, this is great. And so, my leadership team every Friday after the monthly Vistage meetings was big eye rolls because there was always some new thing that we were about to do. And we self-implemented for a couple of years, and like we thought we were doing amazing. And then we got to a certain state in the company where we could afford to bring on an implementer. We did that. It was Margaret Dixon out of Boulder, Colorado, and in the first meeting, she was like, "What the hell are you guys doing?" And we very quickly realized that like we were nowhere close to being to where like fully optimized and where we should be. And like the core values and the people analyzer and a lot of this stuff, and it happened with us, and you hear this across the board, is like it 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 helps you identify people inside of your organization that may not belong there. And it's not like they're not bad people or anything like that. It's just a matter of like they just don't fit the core values, and there's another organization out there that does. um did you guys go through, like, when you implemented, were you like, holy crap, like we've had core values, but now that we like have clearly articulated and they're crispy, now we need to reevaluate some things?
I think that there were a few people like that who when once we had done the work to really define the values, we realized that the reason that we were having sort of friction with them was because they just didn't align, right? Um, More so, what happened is I think that one of the reasons that we implemented EOS is because we were going through a period of rapid growth. In fact, the company is probably about twice the size now as it was when we initially implemented EOS. And I think that there's a kind of person who will sort of be with you on the ride up to your plateau, which is kind of where we were, which is one of the reasons why we implemented EOS, because we really wanted to go to the next level, and what we were doing was not cutting it. We could just feel it. And like there's that going to that next level, there are some folks who have been with you the whole time who just don't want to go there, right? They want to kind of stay. They sort of longingly think about the before time as the golden era, right? And so it sort of helped us figure out, and so some of those folks are no longer with us. No hard feelings. I cherish all the people who helped us get to where we are today. But when you do the effort and you go through the effort of defining yourselves, defining your vision, defining your values, it helps figure out who should still be there and who should not. Even if they are contributing on a regular basis, they just don't want to go where you're going. We have, our VTO talks about a company that's quite a bit bigger than what we are now, which is quite a bit bigger than what we were 3 or 4 years ago. And it's really great to have that all clearly laid out so that everyone in the organization knows this is what we're talking about. You think, some people have been here, some people have worked here 20 years, like non-partners have worked here for 20 years or more. Like, you remember when we were 9 people, right? And now we're talking about being 80 people in a couple of years. They understand what that means. And so if they're still here, they're bought in on that vision. That's so powerful to be able to lay out a plan for everyone so that they're not sort of like just sort of hoping and a faith-based career path or something. Well, maybe I'll still like this place in a while. They know what we're going to be in 2 years. They know how big we're going to be. That's been really, really powerful. So I would say we probably had more transition because of those sorts of things, because we've identified where we want to take the company, because we talk about the kind of company we want to be. And some folks just don't want to be. They don't want to work for a bigger company. They want to work for a smaller company. And there's nothing wrong with that. Smaller companies are great. We were smaller. So I think we probably have had more turnover and more transition because of that. than values based. We have had a few of those, and what I find about those is it makes those conversations so much easier because you've said, look, these are our 5 values, and these are the 2.5 or 3 that you're just not delivering on, and we can have a really straightforward conversation about that. And to your point, it isn't like none of the people who don't work here anymore because they were bad value fits, none of them are evil. It's just that like this is our value set, which is unique to us, right? And there might be another organization out there and their values, hopefully they have them spelled out as clearly as we do. You just might be a better fit in that company. So, no harm, no foul. But yeah, you're not one of us, right? And that's the thing about creating these values and communicating them and continually working with them through tools like the people analyzer. You say like, this is who we are, this is what one of us is. And so right now, like I said, we're almost 60 people, we're in the high 50s. I would say everyone is one of us because everyone knows what they are, and we've been living these values and communicating them so clearly for more than a year now.
Yeah, and we do a workshop once a month. This whole notion of like hiring for culture fit and how you can bring values into the conversation into like candidate conversations before they ever get through the door. And we always use this example during the workshop of like somebody that like thrives at, call it Tesla, like they are just used to a 12-hour a day grind, always being on the call. Like probably wouldn't work very well in our organization, and like one's not better, one's worse. Like just there's two different one of us and two different ways of kind of seeing the world.
A really good example of that is like our first, all of our values are equally as important, but the first amongst equals in our values is collaboration. We are a service agency. We have teams of people who are specialized in like, project management or account management or creative. There's lots of different creatives in our company. And so collaboration is hugely important. We have to collaborate and come together to solve a client's problems. There are other agencies where it's important to be sort of that lone wolf who goes out there and like, again, and I'm not judging, but like that kind of person, the kind of person who says like, I'm going to put a flag on the hill and y'all are going to follow me to this flag. That's not what works here, right? That's just not who we are. It's not who I am. It's not who, my partners are. And it's not the culture we've built. So when we have, interview conversations, and we've had lots and lots of those over the past couple of years because we've hired so many people, when you start going through the values, that's another cool thing about having them so clearly laid out is you can talk about them during the interview process. Like these are the 5 things that we say are our core values. And you can sort of see it in somebody's eye. Like if they're resonating with it, if they're really getting off on what you're saying, or if it's just not quite like, it's not quite right what they want. And so again, just sort of an unintended, like unexpected benefit of having worked on this as hard as we have is that it really, really helps in the interview process.
I love that collaboration. Like we had at Hunt to Killer, it was like people first. At Talent Harbor, it's go givers, and that's this act of like we give without an expectation for reciprocation, and like it applies just as much externally or to clients or prospective clients as it does to our vendors and internal team. Like we want to make sure that we're all giving and we're all contributing and collaborating to your word, without that type of expectation. It's just how we see the life.
One of the best things about work or interacting with other EOS companies is seeing their values and seeing how they represent their values. It's always so interesting to me to see how other companies are putting together a lot of the same kind of concepts that we did, but just using different words. And so that's a cool thing about interacting, like I said, with other EOS companies is like you guys are kind of speaking the same language. So I can look at your values, I can look at your VTO, I can look at all this stuff. And so we click. I understand where you're coming from immediately, and you understand where I'm coming from immediately.
I 100% agree. Because when you were talking about collaboration, immediately I'm like, well, all of my companies, the first one has always been about people. Like in some capacity, it's always been about people and how those people can come together. One thing that we've struggled with, especially probably the early days where you're like, oh, new clients, let's figure this out. Like, how good are you guys at using your core values for clients and being able to do the hardest thing ever, which is like say no to business or stop doing what you're doing based upon misalignment?
We've gotten better at that. So we have turned down work based on a values mismatch that we've actually been in the pitch process on. Again, as we start to talk about ourselves with the prospective client, and we learn more about them, we realize, no, this isn't really going to work out. And so there's been one or two engagements that we've walked away from in the middle of that process. We've also had clients where it was not obvious that there was a values mismatch until we started working with them, and we just sort of like quietly let those relationships expire, of natural causes, at the end of a project or something like that. We just didn't do anything to try to resuscitate it. So we have walked away from business, which, to your point, I don't know that we would have been as good at 5, 10 years ago, because you want clients, right? It just seems like obvious. Well, of course I want more business, but no, you don't want business that doesn't align with your values. And so the recent issue we had is actually with a long-term client who has a particular person who was really not living up to our values. And I would say also not living up to their values as I understand them to be. And so then our reaction to that and how we engage with the client and the kinds of conversations we have and the words that we use to explain what we're struggling with are very much influenced by having such a good understanding of where we are and what we're trying to accomplish and how we want to work and how we need to work. Those conversations are just heavily influenced. They're very much colored by having such a good handle of who we are and being able to point to words on a page that explains who we are. And I think that we've actually made some progress there. So I feel really good about it. But I also, like I said, I felt one of the best parts of that challenge was having my people hold us to account. Like, that is it. That's working, right? That's what I want. I want them to really believe it. And when they say like, hey, wait a minute, these are our values, collaboration is number one. Empathy is in the middle there. Like, this client that we're dealing with, she's not collaborating. She does not have empathy. Like, what are we going to do? Right. And then that just opens up all kinds of really great conversations, which I think at the end of the day, just strengthen the values. I'm the kind of person who also feels that like problems, issues, challenges are actually when your values become so much more useful and really come into play. Like, it's easy to have values when everything's going great, right? If there's nothing at stake, it's easy to say your values are X, Y, and Z, but it's not until things get hard that the values actually come into play. So in that particular situation, I was just really excited to see my own people push back on us as an executive team and say like, these are our values and how are we going to make this make sense?
Yeah. We used to um every single Friday we would come together and I would task the SLT with identifying one person inside of their core function area, their department, and talk about one core value. Because I think in EOS, like one thing that EOS does well is there's like three different things. The first is like, what's the one, two, or three words for that core value? What's the description? And then put together some sort of vignette. And the vignette really helps kind of bring that to life. And so people that learn different ways like can see it in three different scenarios. But the other thing that we would do is like we would identify actions, decisions, or other things inside of the organization. And every week we would call that out and we would call out that individual. We would say, this is a core value. And we would talk about that action, decision, whatever happened inside the organization. Because like, if you're not constantly talking about it, then it just goes to the wayside. And I heard it sounds like you do something very similar where it's like every single quarter you are getting people together and you are celebrating core values, talking about the vision and what the future holds.
Multiple times a week, I'll be having a conversation and I'll just like in the middle of a sentence, I'll say like, this is empathy. This is what we're talking about, right? I try to bring them up as often as I possibly can, to your point, right? Because you want them to feel like they're alive. They're not just words that you put on a poster that hung on a wall, right? They guide all your decisions. So I'm constantly trying to pull out, like I'll say that like, okay, and what we're talking about right now, this is the 3 of our 5 values that we're talking about. This is how each of these are being applied to this situation that we're discussing. One of our big ones is adaptability. And I think that like that is the field that we're in is constantly evolving. So if you're not adapting, you're dying, right? I mean, you have to keep evolving and adapting along with what we're doing. So every time we have a conversation about that, I'm like, this is what I'm talking about when I say adaptability is such an important part of our value set, because if we're not adapting, we're falling behind. So I try to bring it up as often as possible. We do bring it up quarterly. One of the exercises that we do in our quarterly all company meetings is we do like what we call a values popcorn, where we ask someone to stop and talk about how someone else in the organization has lived our values, or a scenario where the values really came into play. So again, just exercising that muscle of going back and forth. And so they're not just hearing me talk about the values all the time, they're hearing each other and themselves talk about the values. You really have to work to make them a living, breathing part of how you're interacting on a regular basis. And so that's just a couple of ways that we try to do exactly the same thing.
That's adaptability. Like immediately, I'm like, well, ours is growth mindset. Like we have the same kind of like the same things. It's just
That's the cool thing. Like I said, when you see other people's
yeah,
value sets, you're like, oh yeah, that's ours, but we call it this, and you guys are calling it
yeah.
that. And that's just it's kind of fun to see how you yeah.
Um, how easy was it for you? Like, was your senior leadership team like, oh, what's this thing called EOS? Yes, we're all very excited to bring this in and adopt it. Or like, did it take some convincing and showing people the light?
I think where we were when we decided, and we had talked about it off and on for a little while, right? We were sort of EOS curious. We had sort of like had conversations. We had some peer companies, like myself and some of the other partners are in like executive share groups, and so you hear about what other companies are doing. So it was on our radar, and we were thinking about it. But I think for us as a leadership team. And that team, by the way, the executive team, when we first started implementing EOS, it was bigger than it is now. I mean, and when we first sat down with Sue, she said in our first session that like some of you aren't going to be here, in 6 months. You're not going to be on this team anymore. And that felt like, oh my gosh, well, I can't imagine not doing it with these folks. But she was right. We were as many as like, I think it was like 7 or 8 people. It was ridiculous. And then we went down to 4, and then we back up to 5. So I think that there was some trepidation on the part of a few people. Again, there was a discomfort in seeing the company grow up, evolve from what it was to what it was going to be. But the main driver for myself and my partners was that we really felt like we had just hit a wall. We had just plateaued, and the way we were doing it wasn't going to work. If we were going to accomplish our larger term vision of company growth and setting ourselves up on this like really sustainable path so the company can outlive us, it wasn't going to happen the way that we were doing it. So I think there was enough buy-in. I remember specifically somebody telling me that I was going to hate it because I was, as the visionary, I like to have my fingers in a lot of things. I like to be, I was probably a little bit of a control freak from that standpoint. And so they were like, oh, you're going to hate this because it's going to mean that, your position is going to be different or devalued or something. I don't remember what they were saying. And there was times when I was like struggling with trying to figure out how I was supposed to operate because my role is so unique in EOS. No one reports to me. I don't lead any teams. I'm not supposed to get any rocks. Like what exactly do I do? It took me a little while to establish a rhythm there. But what I really wanted, and I think I'm speaking for the majority of my partners, if not all of my partners, we really felt like we needed to change to be able to continue our trajectory. We wanted the company to continue to develop and expand, and we knew what we were doing wasn't working. So understanding that is sort of like that's the first step in welcoming EOS. I've heard horror stories of companies who implement it because they think it's the right thing to do, but they don't really know why they're doing it. Like you have to really want it. You have to believe in the promise of what you're doing it for. And so yeah, there were a few folks who struggled with it, and they've gone on to bigger and better things. They're no longer with us, but for the most part, I think the partnership, we were pretty aligned on needing to do it.
And what was kind of the biggest challenge? And we talked a little bit about like, some of the people around this table aren't going to be here potentially in 6 months. That seems to be maybe like from the EOS implementer playbook, because I've heard that quite a bit. And it without fail seems to happen in almost every single organization.
They probably say it because they know it happens every single time, right? I mean, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, there's going to be one or two that just don't get it or don't want it, and that's okay. What was the biggest challenge with implementing? Like, was there one or two things where you're like, gosh, like this was the hardest thing, and if we would have just done this a little bit differently, it would have been a smoother rollout?
Yeah, I think if we had a smaller, we you know we were trying to live our values, and so we probably had more people in the room than we should have. And Sue called us out on that. She's like, "There's too many people here," and we're like, "Well, I can't imagine doing this without these people." And but she was right. There were too many people in the room. Some of them self-selected out. They just said like, "I don't. This is not me. I don't belong in this room. I don't want to be in this room." And that's great. That's awesome. That's nothing wrong with that. And other people just self-selected out of the company because they didn't like where we were going. So I think the one thing that I would do differently is I probably would have changed the mix, though there's no way I could have known that at the time, right? Um, I think that we've struggled with doing good rocks. I think we've got a lot better at those. And every quarter when we set rocks, I feel like it's the best quarter ever when it comes to rocks, right? I just feel like we're getting better and better at that. But if I look back at our first couple of sets of rocks, they were just ridiculous. I don't know what we were thinking. There were too many of them. It was just like, but, and then I think that not that it was difficult, but easing the whole rest of the company into EOS, getting all of the other managers on board with how it worked and training them up. And then rolling it out to all of the folks that work here. Like that was a bigger lift than I expected it to be, I think. It's great. We're more than 2 years in now and everyone understands it. Everyone has rocks. Everyone is like, is doing the thing. But that was just a bigger lift than I think I expected it to be.
How long did you wait? Because I've heard varying degrees, especially when I interview implementers. I'm like, well, how long would you suggest? How long would you? And I've gotten everything from like 3 months to 2 years is like the window. I think at Hunt to Killer we were probably somewhere between the 9 and 12 months. How long did you wait to push it all the way down into the organization?
We were a year, if I remember correctly, but we were communicating about it to the whole company. We were still doing our all company meetings, not as often as we do now, but we were still having all team meetings, bringing everyone in. We have people in like 9 or 10 different states, and so we were bringing people in, and so we were communicating about EOS well in advance of asking them to start doing it. We were talking about why we were doing it. We were talking about the objectives and getting some of the terminology straight. And, once we had our values set, and the cool thing about that is like our values changed like hardly at all. Like this is like wording within values. Like the 5 values are still the 5 values. They have not changed. But so we tried to ease everyone in, but I would say it was probably like a year before the teams were starting to run their own L10s. If I remember correctly. So we were sort of like in between of what you said. For me, I started to feel the benefit of it so that I became impatient. I wanted us to roll it out sooner. And Sue just kept telling us like, it's not yet, just keep waiting. So we kept sprinkling it in and again, sort of communicating the terminology and getting people comfortable with some of the, precepts of what EOS is before we asked them to actually start doing it. And I think that helped a lot. But yeah, we're about a year.
It's so funny. Like I was laughing while you were saying that because I was the same way. I was like, hey, let's just roll it out. Like we'll just figure it out. Just
Do it
roll it
now.
out to the whole org. Yeah. And Margaret was like, no, not yet. And and that, I understand the logic. Like the logic is all of the core function leaders become like mini EOS implementers, and like they have to be kind of well trained. All of their questions are answered at that point. So I understand why, but that doesn't make me any less impatient.
Part of like who I am is that like once I'm like, okay, this is what we should be doing, I just want to like pull everyone in a room, tell them this is what we're doing, and go do it, right? Like I just want to like start doing it as soon as possible. And so yeah, sometimes that's probably a little too forward. So I have to slow my roll.
Nice. So the last question I usually have for implementers is something along the lines of like, where do you service? Like what do you look for in clients? Well, that's a little different with this. And so the one question I asked, I have a mastermind of consumer product operators that I put together, mostly in the direct consumer space. I'm in the subscription box space. And we had our meeting last week. And I asked everybody this question, and it drove some really good commentary, which is, what was your biggest lesson learned from 2024? Like looking back on the year, we're December 17th. So we're a couple weeks away from calling the year closed. Like what is that biggest lesson that you learned, maybe the hard way, from 2024?
This sounds like a management book like slogan or something, but the thing that sticks in my head from 2024 is summed up with the phrase, the right time to do the right thing is right now. And I feel like as the way business works in 2024 going to 2025 is you really can't wait. You have to make the decision. You have to make whatever action is obvious to you, that the market conditions or your client set, whatever you have to do. You can't just wait for things to get better. You can't hope that they're going to get better. You have to take action. And so the lesson that I learned in 2024, I think, is that because we have such a strong, cohesive executive team now, because we've been doing EOS for more than 2 years, we come to consensus pretty quick. We identify our issues quickly, we talk them through efficiently, and we know what the solution is. And when you know what the solution is, you just have to do it. Like, there's no reason to not do it. Unless, of course, there's personnel involved and you have to there's timing and action and stuff like that. But for the most part, the lesson I learned is when you know what you need to do, you should do it right then. You shouldn't wait. You shouldn't wait for things to get better or hope for things. It isn't that I don't believe in hope. It's not that I'm not an optimistic person, but that's just the lesson I learned. I don't know if that makes a lot of sense, but I just feel like that's the whole promise at the end of the day of EOS, is identifying, talking through issues and solving them. And that's what we're so much better at today than we ever have been. You just have to have enough faith in that process to take the action that is obvious at the end of that conversation. When you know what you need to do, you need to do it. And that's my lesson for 2024.
Love it. That might be the best one that I've heard.
Wow, that's cool.
So don't tell the other people that.
I won't tell them. No, just between you and me.
Brian, real quick, what do you do? What is Ingredient? I want to make sure that folks that have listened this long understand what it is that your organization does, especially if we have people in the audience that are not just curious, but maybe prospective clients.
Our clients are in food. We are food content marketers. And so we are marrying strategy and creative to put messages in front of consumers, to create meaningful relationships between brands and consumers in the spaces that they live in. So a lot of our stuff ends up in social media. It's not all social media. We have a proficiency in all kinds of marketing sort of channels. We're really good at email marketing. We create cookbooks. So basically, if you're in the food space and you need to market to your consumer, we want to talk to you. We have on staff, we have our own photographers, videographers, copywriters, culinary experts. We have restaurant, like high-end restaurant grade chefs out there making food content for our clients, who run the gamut from, big CPG, little CPG, grocery stores. We have clients across the board. And that's just what we do. We love food. We're passionate about food. We're passionate about the role food plays in our families and in our culture. And we just want to celebrate that and accomplish our clients' business objectives using those tools that we have at our disposal. So that's what we are. We're a food content marketing company.
It's awesome. And I've seen your shop. It was either through your website, or I think Alana and I were talking to your integrator and your head of HR maybe about 6 months ago. And we got a quick tour. We could see the background. It is a legit facility that you have. And your clients are, some of them are publicly traded companies. And so you guys are doing huge things over there.
That's actually one of the coolest things. When we started, this just happened this year. Cause like I said, we bought the agency 20 years ago. Ingredient, when we converted over to Ingredient about 9 years ago. And when we first started creating content, we were literally shooting on the floor of a stock room. Right. And we were doing these little tiny, arrangements, and we were making the food on a hot plate. And now we have 3 different kitchens, and we have 3 chefs on staff, and the videographers and the lighting and the rigging and everything else. And the other day I was just we were shooting for Thanksgiving, which is of course our Super Bowl. It's a big deal in food marketing. And it's just it occurred to me, from where we were to where we are, that's what I get really excited about, is just seeing that evolution and that accomplishment that the team can pull off. It's really rewarding.
Awesome. Well, thank you for deciding to spend the last hour with me. I appreciate it. And just a lot of lessons learned, because I think organizations that are out there that are thinking through business operating systems, EOS, should I implement, should I not? For me, it was life-changing. It changed my personal life. It changed my professional life. It seemed to take my brain and put things in the right compartments. And it certainly did that for the company. It sounds like it did that for you too.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with that for sure.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Brian. I appreciate it. Thanks for coming out.
Thanks so much.